Hi, Guy Glidden again, and this is a companion to another video, screencast video that you will be watching at the same time. And in case you've watched it first, the other one is on the topic of primary versus secondary sources. Well, this video takes it a step further, and we're going to go a little further, and what I'm going to do in this one is I'm going to take a topic, not necessarily something that you will be required to do for this course, and I'm going to carry it a step further and look at the sources and how you would use sources for a research question. And in order to give us something to look at, so we're looking at something in the actual rather than a theoretical or a virtual model. The topic is, should it be legal to display the Ten Commandments on or in government facilities? So let's take this topic and let me share a few things with you about the research process that might help you out. As a starter, why would you investigate this issue? Well, I can think of several reasons that might even come up in this course. For example, it is a controversial issue right now, as I think I will show you just a little bit of time. It's not just theoretical, it's an actual case where there is controversy going on right now, and it is timely. It is an example of an issue that's actually being played out in and around the state of Kansas at this very time that we're talking about. And it is a combination of both religious and philosophical beliefs. So it does get to some issues that are very related to this course. For your information on this topic, and the topic again to talk about is, should it be legal to display the Ten Commandments on or in government facilities, is actually the basis of a number of current test cases that will probably go to the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, there have been at least two specific test cases about this issue that have gone to the Supreme Court in the last 10 years. There are several others that are being developed and very much possibly. It's all about the question of when we have a government facility like a county courthouse, a state office building, a state capitol building, should the Ten Commandments, a document from the religious background that many of us share in this class, should that be something that's publicly displayed on government property? So now the focus on this is going to be on research sources rather than your or my views on this topic. I understand that you and I may have views. We may agree, we may disagree. That's not going to be the topic of this particular study. This is all about the research issue of doing the background preparation. Okay, first of all, by this time you should be familiar with the concept of primary sources. And let's talk about the two basic primary sources on this particular issue. And one certainly would be the United States Constitution Bill of Rights, which is Amendment 1 to the United States Constitution, and it's printed in its totality on this slide. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And that right there is where the entire section that has to do with the separation of religion from state government is based in our particular country. That's the whole process. So that's a primary source document. And obviously the question is, what do we mean when it says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof? On the other primary source, obviously we need to go to passages from the Bible, scriptures, that provide references for the Ten Commandments. And I've printed two direct sources of information because there are references, at least two places in the book of Exodus that have to do with the concept of the Ten Commandments. So no further there, but you can see that there are source of materials on both sides of the issue here that we need to deal with. Let's continue with primary sources. Now, if you don't know, and I expect many of you do, we're going to enlighten you here that the interpretation of the United States Congress is what the United States court system, specifically the Supreme Court, says it is. So in our country, the United States Supreme Court has become the arbitrator of constitutionality. So this is where constitutionality questions goes. And to give you some flavor for that, I've given you a link to an article by a highly respected New York Times reporter by the name of Linda Greenhouse. She has been the New York Times specialist on legal issues for many years, and so if you click on that link, you would get some flavor of that particular issue. On the other side, to extend primary sources further from just the Bible, just to show you that not only are there interpretations of the U.S. Constitution, many of you are or should be familiar with the concept of commentaries on biblical interpretation. I don't know about the minister in your church, but in my church, when my minister is going to do research for a sermon, he probably is going to go into and look at probably the notes that he had from seminary, and he's also going to look at probably a commentary on biblical interpretation that is going to give him some background, and that's exactly what the commentary does. It gives detailed background information about ways to interpret and read religious documents, and these are in the form of commentaries. Now, to give you an idea of something you can get a flavor of, I'm providing you with a link of a view to something called the Decalogue. The Decalogue is an official name for the treatise of information behind the Ten Commandments. Deca, as you probably know, is the word for 10, and it's provided by an organization called Religious Tolerance, and there's the link for it. And I purposely chose it because it was not a religious interpretation, and we'll get to that in a little bit here because we're looking. So there's a little bit more about primary source information. Now, here are a couple issues that go at the back. As you might suspect, court watchers do not agree on the meaning of the U.S. Supreme Court decisions. Many of you who witnessed the U.S. Supreme Court decision with regard to the Affordable Care Health Act know that after the courts gave its opinion, many people thought it was the greatest thing coming down since they could remember, and many said it was a terrible example of the Supreme Court overstepping its power. That's not uncommon. There's not agreement. Okay? Also, religious commentaries obviously are going to reflect the bias of the supporting organizations who do not agree. So my religious organization, my denomination, is going to probably have commentaries that, not surprisingly, support the interpretations of religious matters according to that denomination. If you belong to a different denomination or a different religious group, it shouldn't be surprising to you that your commentaries are going to reflect the bias of that organization. And it even goes to the fact there's not even agreement on the text of the Ten Commandments. If you would do your homework, you will find that the Ten Commandments, even the numbering of them and the writing of them, is different with different Catholic, Protestant, and Jewish versions. So in other words, if you were raised in a Catholic household and you learned about the Ten Commandments and religious education through that source, you had one source. If you went to a Protestant church, you would have another source. And if those of you who might be of the Jewish background, Jewish faith, would have another source. So obviously there are going to be disagreements. Suggestions how to deal with that. Now that's a problem. So one of the things for this course here, look at multiple sources. So just don't go to the first source that you find and say, well, that must be right, I'm going to take that one. So when you go to a source on the internet, look at the supporting organization. Try to figure out, is that an organization that might have a bias? Now, it doesn't matter whether I or you agree or disagree with the bias. We simply want to identify, is there a possible bias? In other words, a bias would be something where other people, we might not agree about the source background information. In important research questions, we encourage people strongly to get balanced source information. So if you want to make sure you have a good background information, and we were going to ask you to write an authoritative paper on this topic, we would probably ask you to look for several different sources of information. So you might categorize in saying, here are some sources of information that take one point of view. Here is a second point of view, and maybe here's a third point of view. For the purpose of this course, we simply want you to be comfortable in identifying bias. We want you to make sure that you're carefully trying to recognize differences, and we want to put a lot of emphasis on separating fact from opinion. I have option here. Let's rewrite that. Maybe that'll be better. It's a little clearer here, so I don't have a misprint in here. Let me give you just in about 1 minute to end this process to give you a kind of an overview about how this has all changed. And let me do a comparison and contrast. And let me simply say research in 1970. And I picked 1970 because that's when I completed my dissertation. At that time, there was no such thing as the internet. We had to go to do research in a specific subject matter. We had to go to research libraries at universities. Finding information was very difficult, but the thing that we found out was that once we found information in a good, valid research library, we didn't have to worry about validating. So 1970, hard to find, easy to validate. Okay, now let's compare that with research in 2012. At this time, any of you with a good handheld device, and most of you probably have that, can research any topic you want to by simply clicking a button. You can find lots of information out there. But what's the problem? Is it valid information? Just because it's out there, there's a wealth of information, it's hard to validate. So, easy to find, hard to validate. Let me close those up a little bit here so you can see those a little bit better. So, what's a body going to do? Now you can find lots of information. It's really important for you to ask lots of questions, like identifying bias and validating sources. So this part is what you need to work on right now. Validating sources of information, making sure that the stuff that you have is good stuff, is critically important. So put this together. We'll use this information again as we continue down the road of looking for sources, looking for primary sources, and figuring out what we need to research questions. That's all for now.